We all remember seeing this breaking news on May 2nd, 2011.
The American people and to the world that the United States has conducted an operation that killed Osama bin Laden, the leader of al-Qaeda.
The most feared terrorist in the world was finally dead. Bin Laden rose to infamy in 1998 when he orchestrated the 1998 twin embassy bombings in Kenya and Tanzania that killed over 200 people.
Many were en route to their places of work or at work already. A team of terrorists who security authorities believe had been in Nairobi for at least 2 weeks assembling a truck bomb arrived at the US Embassy.
But he became the most wanted man in the world when he killed 3,000 people on 9/11. 8 years after his death, we got to see this.
Last night, the United States brought the world's #1 terrorist leader to justice. Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi is dead. He was the founder and leader of...
The death of Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi shocked the world, but it was not considered to be quite on the same level as that of bin Laden. But would you be surprised to learn that intelligence officers and military experts considered al-Baghdadi to be the more dangerous one? This assessment is based on al-Baghdadi's operational effectiveness, command structure, and ideological impact. Unlike bin Laden, who operated al-Qaeda as a decentralized, cell-based network, al-Baghdadi established a proto-state with territorial control, a functioning bureaucracy, and a dedicated revenue stream. The Islamic State, under his leadership, controlled vast swaths of Iraq and Syria, implemented a sophisticated governance model, and leveraged digital propaganda to radicalize and recruit operatives globally. In terms of raw numbers, bin Laden is estimated to have killed 4,000 to 5,000 people. Al-Baghdadi, on the other hand, is estimated to have killed between 50 to 100,000 people. While bin Laden focused on strategic, spectacular attacks against high-value targets, al-Baghdadi weaponized territorial dominance, psychological warfare, and digital insurgency to create a self-perpetuating cycle of radicalization and violence. His ability to hold territory, field combat divisions, and disrupt regional stability at a scale al-Qaeda never achieved is why many defense analysts consider him the more dangerous threat. Let us look at the rise of al-Baghdadi from his youth to his fateful death. Born in 1971, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi's birth name was Ibrahim Awad Ibrahim al-Badri. He hailed from the city of Samarra in central Iraq, a city known for its rich history and its deep roots in Islamic tradition. Samarra was a place of both cultural significance and political tension, elements that would shape Baghdadi's worldview from an early age. Baghdadi's family was religious, with his father, Awad al-Badri, being an imam. Raised in a conservative household, young Ibrahim was exposed to the tenets of Salafi Islam, a strict puritanical form of Sunni Islam that advocates for a return to what is perceived as the purest form of Islamic teachings. This upbringing would play a crucial role in shaping his ideology later in life. Baghdadi attended the University of Baghdad, where he studied Islamic theology. His time at university was marked by his academic focus and the development of an intense commitment to the radical ideas that would define his later actions. In his early years, Baghdadi was known as a quiet, intellectual figure, someone who kept to himself, but whose mind was consumed by radical religious thoughts. But it was the Iraq War of 2003, which toppled Saddam Hussein's regime, that would provide the conditions for Baghdadi to transform from a quiet scholar into one of the most dangerous men in the world.
My fellow citizens, at this hour, American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations to disarm Iraq, to free its people, and to defend the world.
The invasion of Iraq led to the destabilization of the country, creating a power vacuum that would be filled by extremist groups. In the wake of the American-led invasion, insurgent groups began to proliferate, and one of the most notorious was al-Qaeda in Iraq, or AQI. AQI was led by the infamous Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, a Jordanian militant who saw the Iraqi conflict as a battle for the heart and soul of Islam. He had no tolerance for anyone who did not share his extreme vision. Zarqawis. AQI was known for its brutal tactics, including mass bombings, executions, and sectarian violence. It was during this time that Baghdadi became involved in AQI. Initially serving as a cleric and a recruiter, Baghdadi quickly became a rising figure within the group. His education and knowledge of Islamic theology made him an appealing figure to both radical militants and followers alike. However, Zarqawi's reign would be short-lived. In 2006, Zarqawi was killed in a US airstrike. His death left a leadership vacuum within AQI, one that would soon be filled by a man who would redefine the group. In 2007, Baghdadi was briefly captured by US forces and imprisoned in a facility known as Camp Bakr. His time in captivity, however, would prove to be formative. Baghdadi used his time in prison to connect with other jihadists and radicalize them. This network of extremists would prove instrumental in his rise to power. By 2010, AQI had been largely defeated, but the seeds of a new organization were already being sown. After the death of Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, Baghdadi emerged as the leader of AQI, which by then had rebranded itself as the Islamic State of Iraq, ISI. His ascension marked the beginning of a new era of terrorism, one defined by brutal tactics, a strategic vision, and a terrifying sense of mission. Under Baghdadi's leadership, the Islamic State of Iraq expanded, adapting to the changing dynamics in the region. As the Syrian civil war unfolded, Baghdadi capitalized on the chaos and began to expand into Syria, where he founded the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, or ISIS. With its brutal tactics and a global reach, ISIS grew rapidly, seizing territory from both the Iraqi and Syrian governments. By 2014, ISIS controlled vast swathes of territory, including major cities like Mosul, Fallujah, and Raqqa. It was during this period that Baghdadi declared the establishment of the so-called caliphate and declared himself the caliph, the leader of all Muslims worldwide. Baghdadi's ISIS was not just a militant group, it was a state. They had a hierarchical structure, an economy, and an ability to govern the territory they controlled. Baghdadi's leadership was marked by an unyielding commitment to radicalizing the population under their rule, using brutal tactics to enforce their vision of Islam, including mass executions, enslavement, and genocide. ISIS's expansion was staggering. By 2014, the group controlled an area roughly the size of Great Britain, with millions of people living under its brutal regime. Governments across the Middle East, particularly Iraq, Syria, and Libya, struggled to contain the insurgency. The terror campaign not only destabilized the region, but also sent shockwaves across the globe. Under Baghdadi's command, ISIS launched some of the most terrifying and devastating attacks in recent memory. These attacks were designed to terrorize, destabilize, and spread fear across the globe. Some of the most notorious attacks include the 2015 Paris attacks. On the night of November 13, 2015, Paris was rocked by a series of coordinated terror attacks that targeted several locations across the city. Gunmen stormed the Bataclan Theatre during a concert, taking hostages and opening fire on the crowd. At the same time, suicide bombers detonated explosives near the Stade de France, where a football match was being played between France and Germany. Another group of attackers targeted restaurants and cafes in the city centre, indiscriminately, murdering diners. By the end of the night, 130 people were dead, and hundreds more were injured, many critically. This attack, claimed by ISIS, sent shockwaves across Europe and the world. The perpetrators were heavily armed and well coordinated, signaling a shift in ISIS's tactics, an increasingly globalized reach designed to cause mass casualties in urban centers. The Paris attacks highlighted the vulnerability of European cities to ISIS-inspired terrorism and became a defining moment in the global war on terror. The 2016 Brussels bombings.
The Belgian capital of Brussels was hit by a series of explosions at two locations on Tuesday.
Less than 6 months after the Paris attacks, ISIS struck again, in Brussels on March 22, 2016. 2 coordinated suicide bombings hit Brussels airport and a metro station near the European Union headquarters. The first bomb went off in the departure hall at Zaventem Airport, followed by a second explosion near a metro station in the city centre. The attacks killed 32 people and injured over 300 others, many critically. ISIS claimed responsibility, and once again, their modus operandi was clear. High-profile, carefully planned assaults aimed at paralyzing a European capital. The Brussels bombings were a direct attack on the heart of Europe, specifically targeting transportation hubs that connected the city to the rest of the continent. Like the Paris attacks, these bombings were intended to undermine public confidence, further disrupt European unity, and show ISIS's ability to strike anywhere, even in capitals with high security. The 2017 Manchester Arena bombing.
Oh my God! Oh my God!
On May 22, 2017, a suicide bomber detonated an explosive device in the foyer of the Manchester Arena, England, after an Ariana Grande concert. The blast killed 22 people, including many young concertgoers, and injured 139 others, 50 of whom were critically wounded. The attack was a horrifying reminder that no event, regardless of its nature, was off-limits for ISIS. The bomber, Salman Abedi, was a member of the Libyan diaspora in the UK, who had been radicalized and received training from ISIS operatives. The attack was designed to maximize casualties and target innocent civilians in one of the most public and vulnerable environments possible, an entertainment venue. The Manchester Arena bombing was especially harrowing because of the age of many victims, with children and teenagers making up a significant portion of the casualties. Baghdadi's rise and the growing threat of ISIS had a direct impact on global politics, including the 2016 US presidential election. As ISIS carried out its attacks, there was a growing concern among the American public about terrorism and security. This, in part, fueled the campaign rhetoric of Donald Trump, who promised to eradicate ISIS if elected. The US government responded by ramping up efforts to combat ISIS, particularly after the 2015 Paris attacks. US airstrikes, along with ground support from Iraqi and Kurdish forces, began to push ISIS back. By 2017, the territorial losses suffered by ISIS were significant, and Baghdadi's once formidable caliphate was beginning to crumble. In 2019, the US military launched a targeted operation to track down Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. For years, Baghdadi had managed to evade capture, operating from a series of hideouts. But as his territory shrank, his hiding spots grew smaller, and the US closed in on him. On October 26, 2019, US Special Operations Forces launched a daring nighttime raid to eliminate Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. The mission, authorized by President Donald Trump, was the culmination of years of intelligence gathering, surveillance, and high-stakes military planning. The operation began with US intelligence pinpointing Baghdadi's location in a remote compound in Barisha, a village in northwest Syria's Idlib province. Idlib was a surprising place for Baghdadi to be found, long considered a stronghold for rival extremist groups rather than ISIS. However, intelligence sources revealed that Baghdadi had been hiding in the area for months, aided by a network of trusted operatives. Once his location was confirmed, elite members of the US Joint Special Operations Command, known simply as JSOC, including the Army's Delta Force and Rangers, prepared for the mission. The raid was launched from a military base in Iraq, with helicopters carrying the elite commandos across the Syrian border. The approach was treacherous, as the helicopters had to fly low to avoid detection, skimming just above the rugged terrain. As the US forces neared the compound, they encountered enemy fire from militants guarding Baghdadi's hideout. The commandos swiftly returned fire, neutralizing the threat before advancing toward the compound's perimeter. The operation had to move quickly. Baghdadi had a history of using human shields, and the risk of him attempting to escape was high. To breach the compound, US forces used explosives to blast through the outer walls, avoiding a booby-trapped entrance. Inside, they encountered a number of Baghdadi's fighters, some of whom were engaged in a final, desperate resistance. Several militants were killed in the firefight, while others surrendered. Women and children were found inside and were escorted out by US troops. Baghdadi, realizing he was surrounded, retreated to a tunnel beneath the compound. As the commandos closed in, they sent in a military dog, a Belgian Malinois named Conan, trained for combat and tracking high-value targets. Conan pursued Baghdadi into the tunnel, which was dark, confined, and designed to be a last resort escape route. Trapped and unwilling to surrender, Baghdadi made his final, fateful decision. He detonated a suicide vest strapped to his body, instantly, killing himself and 2 of his young children, whom he had taken with him into the tunnel. The explosion caused the tunnel to partially collapse, sending debris flying and wounding Conan in the process. Once the dust settled, US forces confirmed Baghdadi's death through DNA testing at the scene. His body was mutilated by the blast, but samples collected allowed intelligence officials to positively identify him within hours. The death of Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi marked the end of an era of terror. His violent vision for a global caliphate was shattered, but the legacy of ISIS continues to haunt the world. His death, while significant, did not mark the end of the group he once led. ISIS remnants continue to pose a threat, albeit in a diminished capacity.